What if Doggerland never sank? Part 1. The heart that refused to stop beating. The English Channel shouldn't exist. For over 99% of human history, Britain was never an island. It was simply the hilly western edge of a massive, fertile plain that stretched all the way to the coast of Denmark. We have a name for this lost heart of Europe, Doggerland. In our present reality, roughly 8,000 years ago, a catastrophic tsunami known as the Storegga Slide swallowed this paradise whole, turning an entire civilization into refugees and fundamentally breaking the map of the world. But what if that slide never happened? What if the land stayed and the lost heart of Europe remained beating? Imagine looking at a map of the world in our contemporary era and seeing a continent that is physically 20% larger. You wouldn't need a ferry or a tunnel to reach the mainland. You could drive from London to Berlin in 6 hours without ever seeing a single drop of salt water. Today, we are filling that hole back in. We are exploring the megacity of the North, a place that shouldn't exist, and we'll see how 1,000,000 square miles of grass and wildflowers changed the outcome of every war, every famine, and every revolution in human history. Have you ever looked at a map and felt like something was missing? You were right. Chapter 1. The Land That Defied the Waves. The Storegga Slide was the final blow in our history, a massive underwater landslide off the coast of Norway that triggered a wave of destruction. But in this world, the sea level stabilizes just a few feet lower, and the slide never occurs. The land bridge remains. It is not just a bridge. It is 1,000,000 square miles of the most fertile soil on the planet, an American Midwest tucked right between England and Germany. Imagine standing on a plain where the wind blows across endless grass, uninterrupted by the salt spray of the North Sea. Because this land is so flat and so rich, the first civilizations don't emerge in the mud of the Nile or the heat of Mesopotamia. They start right here, in the temperate paradise of the North. The relatability effect. Here is the feeling of a world that is physically connected. There is no island mentality for Britain because there is no island. History becomes a story of land and soil, not of ships and isolation. This is the moment where the emotional anchor of European unity is forged, not through treaties, but through the ground beneath their feet. Chapter 2. The Birth of Doggerland. By the time our history reaches the year 1000, Doggerland isn't just a collection of farms. It is the home of Doggerland, the largest city the world has ever seen. In our world, London, Paris, and Amsterdam are the stars of the North. In this timeline, they are just sleepy suburbs or mountain outposts. The real action takes place at the crossroads of the Rhine, the Elbe, and the Thames, which, in this world, are all just tributaries of one colossal, central river. Imagine a city that rivals the grandeur of Constantinople or Rome, with marble towers rising from the green plains. Its harbor handles ships from every corner of the earth, located exactly where the North Sea used to be. Does it make you feel a little insignificant to think that the greatest urban center in human history has been missing from our maps for 8,000 years? This city becomes the heart of global trade, a central nervous system for the continent that makes the borders of our world seem like an artificial mistake. Chapter 3. The Shield Against the Vikings. In our history, the Viking Age was defined by the longship, the ability of Norse raiders to strike the defenseless coasts of England and France at will. But in a world where Doggerland exists, there is no coast to raid. The Vikings are forced to take a completely different turn. Instead of becoming masters of the sea, they develop a legendary light cavalry, becoming the Mongols of the North. Imagine a horizon filled not with sails, but with thousands of Norse horsemen sweeping across the Doggerland plains. But they are met by a standing army of the Doggerland Empire, a shield of the plain that prevents them from ever reaching the soft underbelly of Europe. History becomes a story of massive land wars and defensive lines that make the English Channel look like a minor puddle. Because of this, the Viking Age is not an era of scattered raids, but a century-long struggle for the soul of the Central Plain. The very nature of European warfare is rewritten, not by the sword, but by the terrain. Chapter 4. The Death of the Royal Navy. This leads us to a terrifying realization for those of us who know our history. If Britain isn't an island, there is no island fortress. There is no Royal Navy. There is no British Empire as we know it today. The pattern break. Here is the collapse of the British naval tradition before it even began. Why build a fleet when you can be reached by a tank from Paris or Berlin in a matter of hours? The geopolitical center of gravity shifts entirely to this central plain. The high stakes of the world are no longer found in the Atlantic or the Pacific, but in the control of the breadbasket, the endless fields of Doggerland that feed the entire continent. We are looking at a Europe that is more crowded, more stable, and perhaps more dangerous. A world where the old world never really ends because everyone is too well-fed and too connected to revolt. We've saved the land, but in doing so, have we lost the spark of revolution that shaped our present reality? Part 2. The Industrial Spine and the Eternal Wild. Chapter 5. The Bread of Peace. In our present reality, the history of Europe is written in blood and hunger. The French Revolution, the rise of radical movements, and the collapse of empires were almost always triggered by a simple, terrifying reality: bread shortages. But in a world where the heart of Doggerland remains beating, the hunger of the masses never arrives. Doggerland is the undisputed breadbasket of Europe, 1,000,000 square miles of the most fertile silt on the planet. Imagine the psychological impact of a continent that has never known a widespread famine. In this timeline, the wheat and corn from the Central Plains feed everyone from the peaks of Scotland to the islands of Greece. This economic stability creates a golden cage for the human spirit. Because the people are well-fed and content, the desperate energy required for a revolution never ignites. The relatability effect here is profound. We think of our history as a struggle for rights, but in this world, those rights were traded for a full stomach centuries ago. This leads us to a disturbing question. Is a world without hunger also a world without progress? Chapter 6. The Eternal Crowns. Because of this food security, the political map of Europe remains frozen in time. In our modern landscape, we are used to republics and democracies, but in the Doggerland timeline, the monarchies of Europe stay in power for centuries longer. The old world never truly ends. The kings and queens of the 18th and 19th centuries aren't overthrown. They are celebrated as the guardians of the Great Plain. Imagine a contemporary era where the royal houses of Europe still hold absolute authority, supported by a wealthy, stable middle class that has no reason to rebel. This creates a Europe that is more conservative, more predictable, and deeply unified under a few ancient lineages. The high stakes of politics are shifted from revolutionary street battles to the quiet corridors of the dog police palaces. We've traded the chaos of democracy for the silence of stability. But as we look at the horizon, we realize that this peace comes with a hidden cost, a society that has forgotten how to change. Chapter 7. The Serengeti of the North. While the humans built their empires, the land itself preserved a world we thought was lost forever. In our history, the sinking of Doggerland was a mass extinction event. We lost the habitat for the European lion, the giant elk, and the woolly rhino. But in this world, these creatures have 1,000,000 square miles of protected, fertile plain to roam. Imagine taking a high-speed train across the Central Plain and seeing a pride of lions hunting giant elk just outside your window. This is not a zoo. It is a wilder, richer, and more beautiful Europe. The emotional anchor. here is a sense of wonder and relief. The feeling that we didn't just save a landmass, but we saved the very heart of the wild. In our current day and age, we struggle to restore nature, but in the Doggerland timeline, nature never left. Europe remains a prehistoric paradise integrated with an industrial superpower. Does that sound like a world you'd want to live in? Or is the presence of ancient predators just another layer of danger in a crowded world? Chapter 8. The Steam-Powered Heartland. In the 19th century, Doggerland's geography creates a technological explosion. Because the land is perfectly flat, the cost of building infrastructure is a fraction of what it was in our history. While our ancestors were struggling to blast tunnels through mountains, the engineers of Doggerland were laying thousands of miles of track across the endless grass. Imagine a high-speed rail line built in the mid-1800s that connects the heart of Denmark to the Scottish Highlands in a single afternoon. This industrial spine turns the entire continent into one giant, interconnected suburb. You might live in the hills of Britain and work in the skyscraper district of Doggerland, and it's just a 45-minute commute. The relatability of this world is the ultimate connectivity. Europe isn't a collection of different cultures. It is one continuous urban and agricultural grid. We are one people because we have one land. But as the steam engines begin to chug across the plains, the eternal peace of the monarchies is about to face its first real threat, the sheer speed of the future. Part 3. The Geopolitical Superpower and the Impossible Exit. Chapter 9. The Impossible Brexit. In our present reality, the word Brexit defined an entire decade of political chaos, driven by the idea that an island nation could simply detach itself from the continental mainland. But in the world where Doggerland remains, the very concept of separation is a physical impossibility. You can't exit a landmass you are physically attached to. Imagine a world where the island mentality of Britain never existed. Instead of a stormy channel acting as a barrier, there are only endless, rolling fields of wheat and the high-speed pulse of the central rail. The relatability effect here is the sheer ease of movement. For a citizen of this world, Europe isn't a political union you join or leave. It is the ground beneath your feet. Political isolationism in this timeline isn't just a choice. It's a geographical absurdity. How do you argue for independence when your water, your food, and your electricity all flow through 1 million square miles of shared land? This physical unity creates a society that is more stable, more integrated, and far more powerful than anything we can imagine. Chapter 10. The Fortress of the Plain. Think about the most terrifying moments of the 20th century in our history. The Blitz, the U-boat blockades, and the D-Day landings. In a world where Doggerland exists, none of these events ever occur. Because there is no English Channel, the moat that protected Britain is gone, but it has been replaced by something far more formidable, the shield of the plain. Instead of naval battles, the military history of this world is defined by impenetrable defensive lines that stretch across the heart of the Doggerland plain. These are not just trenches. They are massive, permanent fortifications integrated into the landscape, making a lightning-fast blitzkrieg impossible. Imagine a Europe where the great powers reached a military stalemate centuries ago because the cost of invading the central heartland was simply too high. This creates a modern map defined by unity through geography, a story where the world wars were either avoided entirely or transformed into static, defensive standoffs that never reached the civilian centers. The emotional anchor for the people of this era is a profound sense of safety. They live in a fortress that covers an entire continent. Chapter 11. The Doggerland Block. If you look at the global balance of power in our contemporary era, you see a struggle between the United States and China. But in this timeline, both are dwarfed by a single entity, the Doggerland bloc. By combining the industrial might of Germany, the financial reach of Britain, and the agricultural gold mine of the Central Plain, this bloc has become the most powerful political and economic force on the planet. Imagine a political entity that controls the world's breadbasket, its most advanced high-speed rail network, and a population that has been unified for over 1,000 years. The high stakes of global trade are decided not in Washington or Beijing, but in the marble halls of Doggerland. This isn't just a trade union. It is a continental superstate that dictates the rules of the global game. Does it feel strange to think that the presence of one piece of land could relegate the world's current superpowers to the status of secondary players? The Doggerland bloc is the undisputed center of human civilization, and every other nation is just orbiting its gravity. Chapter 12. The Global Anchor. As we look at the contemporary world, the existence of Doggerland has acted as a global anchor. In our history, the discovery of the New World and the rise of the United States were driven by Europeans looking for an escape from their crowded, war-torn continent. But in the world of the Great Plain, why would anyone leave? When you have infinite fertile land and a stable, wealthy empire at home, the New World becomes a curiosity, not a necessity. The pattern break. Here is the delay of global colonization. The Americas and Australia are discovered much later, and they are never settled with the same desperate energy. The world remains Europe-centric because the heart of Europe was too rich to abandon. We are looking at a planet where the cultural, scientific, and economic center never shifted across the Atlantic. It stayed right there, in the wildflowers and the wheat of the lost heart. As we move into the final chapters of this story, we have to ask, in saving Doggerland, did we create a paradise of stability or a gilded cage that prevented the rest of the world from ever truly waking up? Part 4. The Glass Plains and the Living Giants. Chapter 13. The Serengeti of the North. In our history, the sinking of Doggerland was one of the greatest ecological tragedies of the prehistoric world, a mass extinction event that silenced the roar of the European lion and the thundering hooves of the giant elk. But in the world where the land remained, these creatures never became myths. The central plain of Doggerland is 1,000,000 square miles of protected wilderness that functions as a Serengeti of the North. Imagine looking out the window of a high-speed train and seeing a pride of lions stalking a herd of woolly rhinos through a field of wildflowers. This isn't a safari park. It is the everyday reality of the European continent. The relatability effect here is found in how modern society has adapted to these giants. We don't just build fences, we build wildlife corridors that span entire provinces, allowing the ancient fauna to migrate from the hills of Scotland to the forests of Denmark without ever crossing a human road. The emotional anchor for a citizen of this world is a profound sense of pride, the knowledge that they didn't just save a landmass, but they saved the very soul of the wild. Chapter 14. Doggerland, the Technical Marvel. While the wild thrives in the preserves, the center of the plain is dominated by Doggerland, the largest and most advanced urban center in human history. In our present reality, London and Paris are constrained by their ancient geography, but Doggerland was built on a blank canvas of endless, flat silt. It is a city designed for the future, where the Thames, the Rhine, and the Elbe meet in a colossal delta of marble and glass. The architecture of Doggerland is the greatest technical achievement of the human race. Because the ground is composed of soft river deposits, the city doesn't grow up with heavy stone. It grows out and down, using lightweight, flexible materials and massive floating foundations. Imagine a city where the streets are multi-level automated transit grids and the parks are vertical forests that reach into the clouds. The pattern break. Here is the realization that in this world, London is considered a sleepy mountain suburb. The real heart of the planet's economy beats in the center of the Doggerland plain, in a city that manages more trade than every port in our history combined. Chapter 15: The Infrastructure of Abundance. Because the land is perfectly flat and the soil is incredibly rich, the infrastructure of Doggerland is a masterpiece of efficiency. In our timeline, we struggle with the cost of energy and travel, but in the Doggerland timeline, these are solved problems. The vast wind farms of the plain and the geothermal plants built into the deep silt provide nearly infinite clean energy for the entire continent. Imagine a commute that spans 3 countries but takes less time than a modern subway ride. The Central Rail is a vacuum-sealed hyperloop system that fires pods across the plain at hundreds of miles per hour, making the idea of distance irrelevant. You might wake up in a cottage in the British Hills, work in a skyscraper in Doggerland, and have dinner on the Danish coast. And it's all part of a single, interconnected suburban experience. This is the relatability of a world without borders. Geography isn't a barrier to your life. It's an invitation to explore. Chapter 16: The Cultural Soul of the Plain. This physical unity has produced a hybrid identity that doesn't exist in our world. There are no English, French, or Germans in the heart of the plain. There are only Doggerlanders. Their language is a fluid, musical mix of ancient tongues, and their culture is defined by a deep respect for the land that feeds them. The high stakes of this contemporary era are no longer about national pride, but about stewardship. Because they are so physically attached to one another, the people of the Doggerland bloc have developed a collective consciousness. If a factory in the east pollutes a river, the farmers in the west feel it immediately. This has created the world's first rational democracy, where decisions are made based on the health of the great grid. As we move into the final chapters of this story, we see a humanity that has reached its peak stability. But as always, the most dangerous threat to a perfect world is the one that comes from within. Part 5: The Final Balance and the Geography of Fate. Chapter 17: The Price of Perfection. In our present reality, progress is often born from necessity and struggle. We built democracies because old systems failed and people faced starvation. But in the world of the Doggerland bloc, that primary driver is largely absent. When everyone has a home on the plain and there is always enough grain, why fight for change? This is the golden cage of stability. The modern society of the Great Plain is efficient and wealthy, but it might lack the creative spark that comes from friction. Without the desperate need to innovate to survive, technological progress in this timeline is slower, though more purposeful. It is a world where humanity has chosen comfort over adventure. Does that feel like a victory to you, or like a loss of our human essence, that the greatest revolutions of our history simply were never needed? Chapter 18: The World That Was Never Discovered. The presence of Doggerland didn't just change Europe, it altered the entire global map. In our history, the discovery of the Americas and Australia was driven by Europeans looking for new routes and riches because their own continent became too crowded and restless. But in the timeline of the Great Plain, why would anyone leave? When you have 1,000,000 square miles of unexplored, fertile land in your own backyard, the horizon loses its allure. The relatability effect. Here is the shift in global perspective. Imagine a world where the Americas and other continents remained isolated for thousands of years longer, allowing indigenous cultures to develop without the devastating impact of colonial powers. The world remained larger and more mysterious, simply because Europeans were too content with their own plain. The modern map in this world is a story of a Europe that looks inward, while the rest of the world follows its own path, undisturbed by the age of discovery. Chapter 19: The Geography of Fate. As we look back at the Storegga slide, the catastrophe that swallowed Doggerland in our world, we have to ask if that disaster was actually a blessing in disguise. In our timeline, the loss of the land bridge forced us to become sailors, explorers, and innovators. It turned Britain into an island fortress and forced Europe into a constant dynamic of competition and invention. In the world where Doggerland stayed, humanity is safer, better fed, and more stable, but we have also remained somewhat stagnant. Geography dictates our fate. The physical connection of the plane provided a unity that we, in our world, have had to fight for with blood, sweat, and endless treaties. The Doggerland that never sank shows us that the path to a heaven on earth might just be a place where nothing ever changes. Chapter 20. The final question. We have traveled from the prehistoric plains to the glass towers of Doggerland, and we have seen how one piece of land can completely change the course of humanity. It reminds us that we are all products of the earth beneath our feet. Our history is not just written by kings and generals, but by tsunamis, rivers, and mountains. Thank you for exploring this alternate world with us. The world where Doggerland never sank presents us with a profound moral choice. Now, I want to hear from you in the comments, because this is a question that touches the core of our civilization. Would you rather live in our world, with all its chaos, wars, and revolutionary freedoms? Or would you choose the world of Doggerland, where hunger and war are memories and nature still reigns, but where the price is an eternal, unchangeable stability under the wings of a massive, unified state? Is the freedom to fail more important than the certainty of abundance? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. The debate starts now.